So, I want to start by taking us back to November of 1970.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. And it's a pretty grim scene, honestly. There's this massive tropical cyclone that formed over the central Bay of Bengal,
Right.
and it just slowly drifts northward, gaining strength until it completely slams into the coast of East Pakistan, which, is what we now call Bangladesh.
Yeah, exactly.
And the winds were nuts, like howling at over 140 miles per hour. But the wind wasn't actually the real killer here. It was the storm surge.
It always is with those coastal storms.
Right. I mean, picture a wall of water, 33
Mhm.
feet high, just simply erasing the coastline.
Wow. 33 feet.
Yeah. And the people living there, they had absolutely no warning, like none. They had no infrastructure to shield them. And because of that, roughly 500,000 people died.
That number's just, it's hard to even comprehend.
It really is. Half a
Yeah.
million lives completely wiped out in a matter of hours. I mean, it remains one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded human history. It's the kind of statistic that just, completely numbs the mind.
It is entirely paralyzing to think about.
Right.
And historically, when a society faced a catastrophe on that kind of scale, the narrative was almost always one of fatalism.
Like, just accepting it.
Exactly. It was viewed as the wrath of the gods or just the cruel, unavoidable nature of living on a hostile planet. You buried the dead, if you could even find them, and you just accepted that human beings are ultimately powerless.
But then, and this is where it gets really interesting, we fast forward 37 years. It's 2007.
Okay.
Cyclone Sid forms in the exact same body of water. It tracks along an almost identical path. It hits the exact same coastline.
So it's basically a repeat scenario.
Pretty much. The wind speeds were actually slightly higher this time. The destructive potential of the storm is entirely identical. But this time, the death toll wasn't 500,000. It was 4,234.
That is just an incredible drop.
Right. Now, I mean, obviously, every single one of those deaths is a profound tragedy. But we really have to pause and look at the macro picture here. From 500,000 down to roughly 4,000. That is a 99% drop in mortality against the exact same force of nature.
And, nature didn't just decide to be kinder that day.
Right.
The physics of the ocean and the atmosphere behaved exactly as they always do. What changed was entirely human.
Yeah.
The difference between those two numbers is the result of thousands of invisible, deliberate choices to build systems that anticipate disaster. I'd argue it is the greatest, quietest miracle of human civilization.
That's such a powerful way to frame it. And that brings us to the core of what we're doing today.
Yeah.
Welcome to this deep dive. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you're on your commute or, out for a run, you are currently interacting with dozens of invisible systems designed to keep you alive.
And you probably aren't noticing any of them.
Exactly. Our mission today is to look at this massive stack of research, historical data, and psychological analysis we've gathered on this concept of protection. We're going to explore how humanity took the very abstract, ancient concept of courage and actually engineered it into physical infrastructure.
It's a really fascinating lens through which to view human history because usually when we talk about human progress, we point to the loud things, right?
Like rockets and stuff.
Exactly. We point to the moon landings, splitting the atom, the invention of the internet. We look at progress as something that conquers the unknown.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the research we're exploring today frames progress entirely differently. It suggests that the true monument to human civilization isn't what we've conquered, it's what we've insulated ourselves against.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It argues that human protection is civilization's clearest argument against despair, because it's the definitive proof, written in steel and policy, that strangers are worth saving.
I love that. Strangers are worth saving. Let's start right at the biological foundation of this, because the core definition of protection we are working with here is the organized human effort to reduce danger, prevent harm, rescue people in crisis, and preserve life under threat.
Right.
And that entire effort is absolutely necessary because of one undeniable, stark reality. Human bodies are incredibly fragile. We're essentially just soft bags of water and delicate tissue trying to survive on a planet full of sharp edges.
We really are pathetic apex predators when you strip away our tools.
We really are.
I mean, think about our thermal tolerances. If our internal body temperature drops by just a few degrees, we go into hypothermia, our organs shut down, and we die.
Yeah.
If it goes up by a few degrees, our proteins denature and we die. We have no armor, we have no dense fur to protect against the cold, no shells to protect against blunt force trauma.
And we drown so easily.
Exactly. Exactly. We bleed out from relatively minor punctures if they hit the right spot. We are walking around in these highly optimized but completely vulnerable biological vehicles.
And evolutionary biology tells us that when a vulnerable creature encounters a massive threat, say, like a raging fire or freezing floodwaters, the central nervous system has a very simple, highly effective protocol:
Run away.
run away. The survival instinct is hardwired into the deepest, oldest parts of our brain. Prioritize yourself, prioritize your immediate kin, and just get away from the danger.
Which is exactly what makes the concept of organized rescue so fascinating.
Because it goes against that.
Totally. If we were governed strictly by that biological baseline, human history would just be a story of individuals scrambling over each other to survive. But we see something entirely different emerge.
The rescuer's paradox.
Exactly. We see that incredibly powerful survival instinct actively redirected away from the self and toward a complete stranger.
The mechanics of that redirect are just wild to think about. I mean, consider a Coast Guard rescue swimmer. They're standing at the open door of a helicopter, right? Looking down at 20-foot freezing swells in the pitch black of night. Every single biological alarm bell in their body is screaming at them to stay in the helicopter.
As it should be.
Right. But they've undergone months of rigorous training to essentially override their own amygdala. They discipline their own physical fear into service, and they jump. And they do it for someone whose name they don't even know.
It's a profound subversion of nature. And it proves something incredibly practical about humanity. It proves we have the capacity to build systems where one person's life becomes another person's explicit professional responsibility.
We institutionalize it.
Exactly. We don't just rely on random acts of bravery anymore.
Okay, let's unpack this a little bit, because I keep coming back to this idea of society operating like a biological immune system.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Think about it. If you get a cut on your arm, your white blood cells don't convene a committee to decide if the organism's worth saving.
No, they just react.
They immediately swarm the area. They attack the infection long before you ever feel a fever or a symptom. They're just constantly patrolling the perimeter. And modern protection works exactly the same way on a macro level.
Right.
We build these elaborate fire codes, we run evacuation drills, we test municipal water supplies for contaminants, all to fight disasters that haven't even happened yet. The building inspector enforcing a wiring code is basically acting as a societal white blood cell. They're neutralizing a potential electrical fire years before it sparks.
Taking that immune system idea a step further, the research describes this kind of proactive defense as empathy extended through time.
Empathy extended through time.
Yeah, because we aren't just reacting to the infection after we're violently ill, we are anticipating the suffering. When engineers design a bridge to withstand a once-in-a-century earthquake, they are projecting their care into a hypothetical future.
That's a great way to put it.
Every lifeboat, every fire exit sign, every emergency broadcast system is broadcasting a very quiet but powerful message: your life matters before we know your name.
So, if this is our societal immune system, when did we actually evolve it? Because history tells us humanity wasn't always this proactive. I mean, it's easy to look back at history and assume people just didn't care about each other because things were so brutal.
Yeah, the old normal.
If you drop us into 14th century Europe during the Black Death, or a 17th century city burning to the ground, the default setting was basically fatalism. Entire coastal settlements were wiped out by storms. Shipwrecks were a near guarantee of death. Were people in the past really just accepting all this death as fate, or did they simply lack the technology to do anything about it?
It's a crucial distinction, and the history shows it was really a combination of both. But the lack of organization was the real killer. For the vast majority of human history, protection was highly localized.
Like just your neighbors.
Exactly. If your house caught on fire in ancient times, you relied entirely on your immediate neighbors, your kinship group, or maybe a local religious charity. If your neighbor had a bucket and was brave, you survived.
And if they didn't?
If they didn't, or if you were a societal outcast, you burned. The compassion existed, but it was entirely individual and arbitrary.
We do start to see the first glimpses of organized infrastructure with early empires, though, right? Like, the Romans are famous for this.
Oh, they are the classic early example. The Romans realized that a city of 1 million people couldn't survive on neighborly goodwill alone. So they engineered public order systems.
The aqueducts.
Yes, they built the aqueducts not just for luxury, but to separate drinking water from wastewater, which is the foundational step of public health. They established the vigiles, which was an early state-funded firefighting force.
Right.
But the problem with these early systems was their fragility. When the political structure of the empire collapsed, the protective infrastructure collapsed right along with it.
So it wasn't permanent.
No. The aqueducts crumbled, the organized fire brigades vanished, and Europe essentially reverted to localized survival for centuries.
So during the medieval period, you're back to relying on monasteries or local guilds.
Yeah.
If you were injured, a guild might have a small fund to keep your family from starving, but there was no systemic safety net. The mindset was still overwhelmingly reactive. You dealt with the tragedy after it happened.
Exactly. The philosophical shift, the realization that mass suffering shouldn't simply be endured if it can be systematically prevented, really required the shock of the Industrial Revolution.
Because it just brought so many people together.
Yes, industrialization concentrated danger in a way humanity had never seen before. You suddenly had thousands of people packed into massive, poorly ventilated factories filled with combustible materials.
Oh, man.
You had miners descending thousands of feet into the earth with explosive gases. You had booming, overcrowded cities with absolutely zero sanitation infrastructure.
The death tolls from early industrial accidents are just staggering. I always think about events like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York.
A completely tragic example.
Right. You have young immigrant women locked inside a factory room just to prevent them from taking breaks. A fire breaks out, they can't get to the inadequate fire escapes, and over 100 of them either burn to death or have to jump out of windows. It was a completely preventable slaughter.
It was horrifying.
And the initial reaction from a lot of the power structures at the time was simply to view it as the cost of doing business.
And that is exactly where the paradigm shifts. Because the citizens refused to accept that premise. The change was not that humans suddenly became biologically more compassionate. The change was that compassion became organized.
I see.
And the unsung heroes of this era weren't just the famous engineers or inventors, they were the labor organizers, the early public health nurses, the sanitation workers.
People demanding better.
Exactly. Following events like the Triangle Fire, you had massive public outrage that translated directly into the creation of the National Fire Protection Association guns, mandatory sprinkler systems, and laws mandating that doors push outward and remain unlocked during business hours.
Wait, doors had to push outward.
Yes. Before that, many doors opened inward. So when a crowd panicked and rushed the door, the sheer weight of the bodies made it impossible to open. Just a simple design flaw that killed so many.
Wow. So the real breakthrough wasn't just inventing a better fire hose. It was turning rescue from a random act of individual heroism into a coordinated, non-negotiable public system. We had to move from reacting to danger after the catastrophe to predicting it and coordinating a response before it becomes mass death.
Precisely. It was the birth of the regulatory state and modern municipal infrastructure. People realized that you cannot build a complex society without a baseline of guaranteed systemic safety. You cannot rely on the charity of a factory owner. You have to enforce a building code.
Okay, this shift in mindset sounds great in theory, but to prove that this societal immune system actually works, we need to look closely at the hard evidence. We need the data of survival, because these systems are so integrated into our daily lives now that we treat them as annoyances.
That's very true.
Take the smoke alarm. We only notice it when we burn toast or, when the battery's dying at 3 a.m. and it starts chirping at us. But when you look at the actual physics and the data behind it, it is a miraculous piece of technology.
It truly is. A standard photoelectric smoke alarm works by aiming a light source into a sensing chamber at an angle away from the sensor.
Okay.
When smoke enters the chamber, it reflects light onto the light sensor, which then triggers the alarm. It is constantly sniffing the air, doing the vigilance work so you can sleep.
That's wild.
And the data shows that having a working smoke alarm reduces the death rate in home structure fires by about 60%.
Wait, 60%? That is a staggering reduction.
Yeah.
It's taking a situation where you would likely die from smoke inhalation in your sleep and converting it into a situation where you have exactly 2 or 3 minutes of warning.
Which is all you need.
Right. That tiny, annoying plastic device buys you the margin of survival. Here's where it gets really interesting. We see the exact same principle in traffic safety.
Oh, absolutely. The physics of a car crash are brutal. If you are traveling at 60 miles per hour and hit a concrete barrier, your car stops in a fraction of a second. But your body inside the car is still moving at 60 miles per hour.
Right, inertia.
Yes. If nothing stops you, your internal organs will impact your rib cage, and you will die from massive internal trauma.
Enter the seatbelt.
Right. A simple strip of woven nylon designed to stretch just slightly to absorb the kinetic energy and distribute the force of the deceleration across the strongest bones in your body.
The pelvis and the rib cage.
Exactly. According to the World Health Organization data we reviewed, that simple mechanical intervention reduces the risk of death for vehicle occupants by up to 50%.
Just a piece of nylon.
Yeah, and correct motorcycle helmet use reduces the risk of death in a crash by more than 6 times. Child restraints reduce infant deaths in crashes by 71%.
We treat them as chores. We grumble about the seatbelt wrinkling our shirts or the helmet messing up our hair, but they are quantifiable lifesavers.
Localized miracle.
But I want to go back to that Bangladesh statistic we opened with, because that requires infrastructure on a completely different scale. You don't save 500,000 people with a strip of nylon. How exactly did they design the mass death out of the equation? What are the actual mechanics of dropping mortality from 500,000 to 4,000 against a Category 4 cyclone?
It was a masterclass in comprehensive systems engineering. First, you have the early warning systems. They didn't just rely on weather satellites to see the storm they had, to translate that data into localized action.
Right, because seeing it doesn't save anyone on the ground.
Exactly. So they set up networks of tens of thousands of local volunteers equipped with VHF radios and megaphones. When a warning was issued in the capital, it was immediately relayed to villages that might not have electricity, and those volunteers went door to door or rode bicycles through the streets with bullhorns, ensuring everyone knew the threat was coming.
So they solved the communication bottleneck. But knowing a storm is coming doesn't help if you live in a floodplain with nowhere to go.
Exactly. So the second pillar was the physical infrastructure. The government and international NGOs built thousands of purpose-built cyclone shelters along the coast.
Just massive concrete buildings.
Yes, but the engineering of these shelters is brilliant. They are built of reinforced concrete, but they are raised on massive pillars. When the 30-foot storm surge hits, the water rushes underneath the main floor of the shelter, rather than battering down solid walls.
Oh, wow. That's so smart.
And during normal weather, these buildings double as primary schools or community centers, so they are integrated into daily life.
That is fascinating. So you have the warning, you have the physical shelter, and the third piece has to be the logistics of getting people there.
That's the evacuation planning. They mapped the evacuation routes, ran drills, and critically, they built designated spaces in these shelters for livestock.
Wait, really? They brought cows into the shelters?
Yes, because they realized early on that poor farmers would refuse to evacuate if it meant leaving their cows behind to drown, as that would mean absolute financial ruin. By accommodating the livestock, they drastically increased human compliance with the evacuation orders.
That is such a deeply human detail to catch.
Right. They treated the disaster as a multi-layered design problem, and the result is hundreds of thousands of people walking around today who would otherwise be dead.
Okay, so I am looking at all this data and understanding these incredibly competent systems, and it leads me to a massive contradiction. I think anyone listening feels this deeply. If we have the data proving we are safer than ever, if we have weather satellites and early warning systems and fire codes, why are we all so anxious? Why does scrolling through the news make us feel like the world is constantly collapsing?
This brings us to the psychological crux of the research. We have to understand the neurobiology of the invisible victory.
Invisible victory.
Yes. The fundamental issue is that successful protection is inherently quiet. By definition, a disaster prevented leaves no evidence.
Right. A bridge that doesn't fall down makes no sound.
Exactly. A fire that is contained to a single kitchen because the drywall was built to a specific fire resistance code doesn't generate a breaking news alert. A city that successfully evacuates 2 million people before a hurricane makes landfall is an astonishing logistical triumph, but it doesn't provide dramatic, terrifying footage for the evening news. It's just logistical competence, and competence is boring to the human brain.
Because our brains are wired to look for the threat.
We are prisoners of our own amygdala. Evolutionarily, if you are a hunter-gatherer, ignoring a rustle in the bushes could mean you get eaten by a tiger.
Right.
Ignoring a beautiful sunset has no survival cost, so we are biologically programmed with a negativity bias. Fear is loud, safety is background noise, and our modern media ecosystem, which is entirely driven by algorithms optimizing for engagement, naturally amplifies this.
Because danger gets clicks.
Danger, outrage, and institutional failure trigger our threat response, keeping our eyes glued to the screen far more effectively than a story about a water treatment plant quietly functioning perfectly for the 4,000th consecutive day.
It creates a profoundly distorted reality. We see the one plane crash, And the algorithm shows us 10 more videos of near misses, but we don't process the millions of incredibly boring, perfectly safe commercial flights that happen that same week. We see the failed rescue, not the thousands of successes. I love the phrase the research uses to describe this. It says that without these quiet systems, modern civilization would just be a bonfire with paperwork.
It perfectly captures the fragility we are managing. But this constant exposure to the negative leads to the paradox of adaptation.
Which means we just get used to it.
Yes, human beings adapt to safety with terrifying speed. The better protection systems become, the less emotionally visible they are. Something that would have appeared as literal magic to someone living 200 years ago, like turning a tap and getting clean, disease-free water, or calling a number and having a mobile intensive care unit arrive at your house in 8 minutes, becomes a baseline, boring expectation within a single generation.
We just assume the ambulance will be there. We assume the bridge will hold our weight.
And because we take it for granted, we start to romanticize the past. This is a very dangerous psychological trap. Memory edits out suffering. We inherit the aesthetics of history much more easily than we comprehend the hardship. There is a line in the research that captures this beautifully. Candlelight looks beautiful from a distance. Cholera does not.
Oof, that hits hard. We look at a painting of a cobblestone street in 18th century London and think, oh, how charming, life was so simple then. We completely edit out the fact that the street was running with raw sewage, that half the children didn't survive past age 5, that a single infected tooth was a death sentence, and that the entire district was one tipped lantern away from becoming a firestorm.
Exactly. Nostalgia remembers the meaning, but it completely forgets the danger.
And when you combine that historical amnesia with our algorithmically driven modern media, you get a toxic cultural byproduct, chronic cynicism. Continuous exposure to crisis headlines produces a warped collective self-image. We start to view humanity as uniquely corrupt or constantly failing. It breeds a loss of civic trust.
And this paralyzing belief that things are only getting worse.
But wait, let me push back here for a second. Isn't fear actually a useful tool? I mean, if we aren't outraged by the failures of our systems, won't we just become complacent? When a bridge does collapse because an inspector took a bribe, or when a building burns because a landlord ignored the code, I should be furious. If we just tell ourselves, well, the systems are working quietly most of the time, aren't we letting the corrupt actors off the hook?
That is a highly valid point, and the research actually draws a very sharp distinction here. Criticism is not just useful, it is strictly necessary. Lives depend on brutal honesty.
Okay, good.
Protection systems are built entirely on public trust, and when they fail carelessly or maliciously, outrage is the exact mechanism that forces reform. Without outrage over the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, we don't get the fire codes. We have a duty to demand better.
So where is the line? How do we separate healthy, necessary criticism from the toxic cynicism you were talking about?
The line is crossed when criticism becomes reductionist. Cynicism conflates imperfection with fraud. It's the intellectual shortcut of treating all protection systems as merely tools of control, profit, or inherent corruption just because flaws exist within them.
It's throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. Yes, a corrupt building inspector might exist. But declaring the entire concept of building codes a scam erases the reality of the thousands of honest engineers doing the math every day. A disaster relief organization might mismanage a grant, but that doesn't negate the millions of lives they've saved through vaccine distribution.
So it's about not being lazy with our critiques.
Yes. The hidden danger of permanent cynicism is that it paralyzes the very capacity for reform it claims to desire. If you believe every institution is completely irredeemable, you stop trying to fix them. You just sit in the ashes and complain.
Okay, so if we want to keep building and refining this societal immune system, we have to fight that paralyzing cynicism. And one area where building this infrastructure is incredibly complex and where our fear is absolutely justified is when we are facing down forces that are massively larger than human scale. Specifically, nature.
Yes.
Historically, we thought if we just built a thick enough wall, we could conquer the elements. How did our protective systems change our relationship with the planet?
Well, nature has consistently punished that hubris. The critical realization in modern protection infrastructure is that we cannot conquer nature. Fire, floods, hurricanes, tectonic shifts, they possess kinetic energy on a scale that renders human pride completely irrelevant.
You can't punch a hurricane.
Exactly. You cannot defeat a Category 5 hurricane like an enemy army. progress only accelerated when society stopped trying to fight nature head-on and started studying its mechanics. We replaced helpless terror with scientific understanding and informed cooperation.
It reminds me a lot of the philosophy behind martial arts, like judo or aikido.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, if a massive 250-pound opponent throws a punch at you, and you stand rigidly and try to block it with brute force, your arm is going to snap. You're trying to conquer the force, and physics won't let you.
Right.
But if you step slightly to the side, grab their wrist, and guide that momentum past you, you survive unharmed. You don't defeat the energy, you redirect it. Humanity eventually learned to stop trying to block the punch.
That is exactly what modern environmental stewardship is doing. Instead of trying to build a massive concrete seawall to block a storm surge, which the ocean will eventually undermine and destroy anyway, we act as caretakers of the natural systems that already perform that function.
Like wetlands and stuff.
Exactly. We replant mangrove forests along coastlines. The complex root systems of the mangroves don't try to stop the water rigidly. They create immense friction, slowing the wave energy down, absorbing the impact, so that by the time the water reaches human settlements, it has lost its destructive kinetic power.
Or we restore wetlands upriver from major cities. Instead of trying to force a swollen river through a narrow concrete channel, which just increases the velocity of the water until it floods a town downstream, we allow the wetlands to act as a massive sponge.
Yes. They naturally absorb the excess volume and release it slowly over time.
So proper protection inherently becomes environmental stewardship.
Absolutely. Or consider seismology. We can't stop the tectonic plates from shifting, but we can monitor the fault lines. We use seismometers to detect the primary waves, the P waves of an earthquake, which travel faster than the destructive secondary waves.
So that gives us a heads up.
Yes, a localized warning of maybe 20 or 30 seconds. That isn't enough time to evacuate a city, but it is enough time to automatically shut off gas lines, power down transit trains, and pause delicate surgical procedures. We use the Earth's own signals to trigger our immune response. We survive nature by understanding exactly where we fit inside it.
That is a deeply elegant way to approach survival. But as elegant as the science is, these complex systems are still designed, funded, and operated by flawed humans. And this brings us to the operational reality, the messy, complicated realities of ethics and inequality. Deciding how to protect people isn't just an engineering problem. It is a profoundly difficult moral one.
It is the most uncomfortable aspect of the field, because resources, time, money, personnel are always finite. In any major crisis, you are operating in a deficit, and that raises brutal ethical questions.
Like who gets rescued first?
Exactly. During a mass casualty event, who gets put in the ambulance first? The person screaming in pain or the quiet person who is actually bleeding out? How much risk is acceptable to ask a rescue worker to take? If a building is collapsing, do you order firefighters in to save one trapped person, risking 6 of their lives?
And even outside of active emergencies, the preventative side has massive trade-offs.
Yeah.
Take safety regulations, upgrading the seismic retrofitting on all older brick buildings in a city undeniably saves lives during an earthquake. But it also costs hundreds of millions of dollars.
And who pays for that?
Right. If landlords pass those costs on to tenants, you might price thousands of low-income people out of their homes, creating a homelessness crisis. You are trading a low-probability, high-impact risk for a high-probability, chronic social crisis.
And that leads to the most glaring ethical failure in our systems. Poor communities almost always face higher risk because of unequal access to protective infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely.
The flood maps might be accurate, but if the wealthy neighborhoods get the improved drainage systems and the poor neighborhoods are left in the low-lying floodplain, the protection system is structurally flawed even if the engineering is sound.
So how do we evaluate these systems? Because if I look at that, it's easy to say, well, the system is biased and flawed, so it's a failure. How do we navigate the nuance without falling back into that cynical trap we discussed earlier?
The research provides a very mature framework for this. It suggests separating every protective system into 3 distinct elements: intent, outcome, and structure.
Intent, outcome, and structure.
Yes. This allows us to diagnose the problem accurately. For example, you can have a disaster relief policy with good intent, but an ineffective structure, maybe the bureaucracy is too slow, leading to a poor outcome. Or you can have a system with a morally flawed structure, like relying on unequal resource distribution, but it still produces a positive outcome by saving lives overall.
The central tension here isn't between perfection and evil.
Yeah.
That is childish thinking.
Right. The real adult tension is between harm reduced and harm remaining. If you demand perfect equity and flawless execution before you launch a rescue operation, people will die while you debate.
Wow.
The research uses a highly practical example. A municipal ambulance system that has slower response times in an underfunded neighborhood is a structural failure. It represents inequality, and it desperately needs to be heavily criticized, funded, and fixed. But that flawed, unequal ambulance system is still morally superior to having no ambulance system at all. Harm reduced is still a victory, even when harm remains.
So what does this all mean? It reminds me that real responsibility is intensely physical. It's so easy to sit on social media and post an aggressive critique about how a local emergency management agency botched an evacuation. It takes 0 calories to be an armchair critic.
Exactly.
But the people actually managing the crisis are dealing in physical reality. Empathy and justice aren't abstract concepts to them. They manifest as actual stretchers, sandbags, triage tags, and human hands pulling debris off a trapped victim. They are doing the messy, imperfect math of survival in real time.
And that physical manifestation of responsibility has completely rewired modern human culture. It has radically changed what it means to be a professional. 150 years ago, a structural engineer or a factory manager was judged almost purely on efficiency and output.
How fast can you build it?
Exactly. How fast can you span this river? How many tons of coal can you extract this month? Today, the very identity of a good engineer is fundamentally tied to safety. If an engineer designs a bridge quickly and cheaply, but it collapses under load, they aren't just considered a bad business person, they are legally and morally culpable.
People survive the systems they build.
Yes. Protection is baked into the DNA of the profession. Think of the codes established by the American Society of Civil Engineers. They are essentially moral documents written in math.
It has shifted how we educate our children, too.
Yeah.
We don't just teach reading and math anymore. We run fire drills, active shooter drills, earthquake drills. We teach health classes, driver's education, CPR. We are constantly socializing the next generation into this culture of preparedness,
We are teaching them to operate the immune system.
which leads to perhaps the most profound concept in the entirety of the research, the idea of the invisible sacrifice. Let's dive deep into that. What exactly is the invisible sacrifice?
We talked earlier about taking our safety for granted. The reality is that modern citizens live inside layers of protective infrastructure that we did not personally build and that were paid for in blood.
Paid for in blood.
Yes, every single occupational safety standard, every aviation regulation, every water purification standard exists because someone, somewhere in the past, suffered or died.
Like the workers at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory.
Exactly. Entire generations of people labored in dangerous conditions, experimented with flawed early designs, fought against corrupt authorities, and sometimes gave their lives so that you and I could experience what we call a normal Tuesday with significantly less fear.
The research notes that compassion is very easy when you're comfortable. It's easy to be kind when your needs are met. But these protection systems reveal compassion under severe pressure. It proves that while humans can be incredibly selfish and tribal, we are also capable of sustained, disciplined care for complete strangers under the most terrifying conditions imaginable.
And inheriting this massive, complex legacy comes with a strict responsibility. We don't just get to passively consume the safety, we have to maintain it.
Because it decays.
Infrastructure ages, metal rusts, public trust erodes, institutions become complacent. If a society becomes indifferent or too tribalistic to fund public works or too cynical to participate in local government, the protection degrades. It is not an automatic law of physics that tomorrow will be safe. It requires constant active maintenance.
I love this framing. If you're listening right now, imagine you're living in a giant, beautiful, incredibly comfortable house. You didn't lay the foundation, you didn't frame the walls, you didn't install the plumbing or wire the smoke alarms. But you sleep soundly every single night because generations of absolute strangers labored, regulated, and sometimes died to build this house for you.
Right.
Our job as citizens of this civilization isn't to wander the halls complaining that the paint is peeling or that the water pressure is a little low. Our job is to patch the roof when it leaks. We maintain the structural integrity. We certainly do not burn the house down just because it has flaws.
That is the absolute essence of stewardship. The healthiest pride we can feel about our civilization isn't arrogance. We haven't conquered danger, and we never will. And our attitude certainly shouldn't be self-hatred or constant, paralyzing cynicism. The appropriate, mature emotion is stewardship.
Stewardship.
We inherited something immensely valuable, forged in invisible sacrifice, and we are responsible for keeping it functional and handing it to the next generation in slightly better shape than we found it.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, let's look at the ultimate synthesis of what this research is telling us. It leaves us with a profound new metric for human progress. Danger, biological fragility, and the sheer destructive force of nature will always exist. They are physical constants.
The true measure of a society is not whether people face danger. The measure is whether people have to face it alone.
Well,
It is whether others come running when they hear the call, equipped with the tools and the systems to actually help. That organized response is the dividing line between despair and civilization.
it's an incredible thought. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative idea to mull over. Something for you to explore on your own that builds on the very core of this research, but pushes it into the near future.
I'm intrigued.
So the history we just covered makes it abundantly clear that humanity's moral imagination grew precisely because humans had to put their own physical bodies on the line to rescue others. We had to discipline our own biological fear to build this empathy.
Right, the firefighter running into the smoke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The rescue swimmer diving into the freezing waves.
Yeah.
The courage had to be physical. It required blood and bone.
Risking the self to save the other. That is the crucible of our empathy.
Right. But look at where our technology is heading. We're moving rapidly into an era where artificial intelligence and robotics are taking over these dangerous roles.
Oh, wow.
AI algorithms are predicting the storm tracks with flawless accuracy, removing the guesswork. Autonomous drones are delivering medical supplies to remote areas. In the very near future, robotic platforms will be the ones pulling people from the burning rubble or navigating the toxic environments, while the human operators sit safely in a command center miles away.
Which is undeniably amazing for operational efficiency and rescuer safety.
It is. But here is the question. Will delegating our physical courage to machines fundamentally change the human empathy that built our civilization in the first place? If physical human sacrifice is what forged our systems of care, what happens to our moral imagination when machines do all the saving? Does our societal immune system lose its soul when we entirely remove our own vulnerability?
That is a stunning question. If the very act of risking oneself is the mechanism that taught us to care for strangers, removing that risk might alter human psychology in ways we can't fully anticipate yet. We might achieve perfect systemic safety, but lose the visceral connection that makes us human.
Something to think about the next time you see a drone flying overhead or an automated severe weather warning flash on your screen. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I encourage you, as you go about the rest of your day, look around your environment. Look at the sprinkler heads subtly integrated into the ceiling of your office. Look at the reflective painted lines on the highway guiding you in the dark. Notice the exit signs. Pay attention to the quiet, invisible monuments of empathy keeping you safe today. Until next time.